The rain had just stopped when the street girl noticed the twins, their small shoulders shaking as they cried beside a black luxury car that looked wildly out of place on that cracked sidewalk. People hurried past without slowing down, shoes splashing through dirty puddles, eyes fixed forward as if sorrow were contagious. The girl stood frozen with a torn sweater clutched around her thin frame, her breath caught somewhere between fear and instinct. In that single moment, before she even knew their names or why they were alone, something inside her shifted. She did not know it yet, but what she was about to do would quietly break the life she knew and rebuild it into something she had never dared to imagine. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that one small act can change everything, please take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories like this. Her name was Grace Miller, though no one on that street ever asked for it. At 19, she had already learned how invisible a person could become in downtown Chicago. She slept behind a closed bakery near West Madison Street, survived on leftover food and the quiet mercy of strangers, and carried a past that felt heavier than the city itself. That afternoon, she had been scavenging for coins when she saw the twins, two identical boys no older than 6, dressed in neat coats now streaked with mud. Their eyes were red and swollen, their faces pale with fear. Grace understood fear. She recognized it the way sailors recognize storms before the sky even darkens. Something had gone wrong, and no one else seemed willing to stop. The boys were alone, but the car behind them screamed wealth. Tinted windows, polished rims, and a faint scent of expensive leather drifted through the air. Grace hesitated. Street life had taught her caution. Rich people meant trouble, questions, blame. But then she noticed the smaller twin clutching his chest as he cried, his breath coming in shallow bursts. Grace's own memories surfaced, nights when panic wrapped around her lungs until she thought she would disappear. She knelt despite the cold concrete biting into her knees and wrapped her arms around the trembling child, pressing his head gently against her shoulder. She slowed her breathing on purpose, letting her body become calm so his could follow. She tore a strip from her sweater to wipe their faces, whispering reassurances without words, the way her mother once had before everything fell apart. Minutes passed like hours. Eventually, the boys' sobs softened into hiccups. Grace scanned the street and finally saw a man running toward them, his face pale with terror. He was tall, sharply dressed despite the rain, and his eyes locked onto the children as if the world had been empty without them. His name was Jonathan Hayes, though Grace would only learn that later. He was a self-made millionaire, known across Illinois for his real estate empire, but in that moment, he was just a father who had looked away for seconds too long. When he reached them, relief collapsed his posture. He dropped to his knees, hands shaking as he checked the twins over and over again, gratitude and guilt battling across his face. Grace stood slowly, ready to disappear before blame found her. That was how survival worked. But Jonathan noticed her torn clothes, the raw redness of her hands, and the careful way she stepped back to give him space. He understood immediately that this stranger had been the only one who stopped. He insisted she stay, his eyes pleading with a sincerity that cut through her defenses. The twins clung to her legs, refusing to let go, their small hands gripping the fabric as if she were the anchor that kept them from drifting away again. Against her better judgment, Grace stayed. What followed felt unreal. Jonathan took the twins home and asked Grace to come along, not out of charity, but because his children would not calm down without her. The Hayes house stood in a quiet neighborhood near Lakeshore Drive, all glass and light and warmth, a universe away from Grace's nightly battles with cold and hunger. Inside, she watched from the edges as doctors were called to ensure the boys were safe. She learned their names were Caleb and Noah, and that they had wandered off while their father took a business call. No kidnapping, no grand danger, just a terrifying accident magnified by a city that rarely slowed down. Jonathan offered her food, then clean clothes, then a chance to shower. Each kindness felt suspicious, like a dream that might end if she moved too fast. Yet exhaustion won. Over dinner, Grace's life spilled out in fragments. A childhood in Ohio, a mother named Ruth who died too young, a foster system that never felt like home, a bus ticket to Chicago that promised escape but delivered survival instead. Jonathan listened without interruption, the way powerful people rarely do. He saw not a street girl, but a young woman shaped by circumstances, not choices. Days turned into weeks. Grace helped around the house, mostly with the twins, who had grown fiercely attached to her. She read to them, walked them to school, and calmed their nightmares. Jonathan arranged for her to get proper identification, counseling, and eventually, classes at a community college nearby. Grace struggled with guilt, feeling unworthy of this sudden safety, haunted by the fear that it could vanish at any moment. But slowly she began to believe that maybe her life was not a finished story after all. The real change came months later, when Jonathan surprised her with a job offer within his company, not as a token gesture, but a real position with training and mentorship. He told her that saving his children had reminded him how fragile everything truly was, and how easily people fell through cracks he had never noticed from the top. Grace accepted with shaking hands. She worked harder than she ever had, fueled by gratitude and the quiet promise she made to herself never to forget where she came from. Years passed. Grace Miller was no longer invisible. She stood tall, educated, employed, and emotionally healed in ways she once believed impossible. She volunteered at shelters, funded by her own paycheck, and spoke to young people who saw their own pain reflected in her story. Caleb and Noah grew up knowing that kindness was not about status, but action. Jonathan often watched Grace with quiet pride, aware that the greatest return on any investment he had ever made came from trusting a stranger who chose compassion over fear. Before the ending, please comment below and tell us what kindness means to you in today's world. On a quiet evening, Grace walked past the same street where everything began. The bakery was still closed, the sidewalk still cracked, but she was different. She understood now that lives change not through grand gestures, but through small, brave moments when someone decides to stop. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that goodness still exists even in hard places, please like, share, and engage with this video. Your support helps these stories reach others who need hope. Grace once believed she was nothing more than a street girl. One choice proved her wrong, and in doing so, changed far more than just her own life.